Thank you so much for being here today. I'm Jill Gage, custodian of the John M. Wing Foundation on the History of Printing here at the Newberry and curator of our current exhibition, Making an Impression, Immigrant Printing in Chicago. Thanks to everyone here and online for joining tonight's program, Producing Culture with Printmaking. Our appreciation also goes to Art Design Chicago and the Terra Foundation for their generous support of this event. Our mission at the Newberry is to connect you with the humanities via our collection. To do this, we organize free public programs, adult education courses, which are not always free, and free exhibitions based on said collections. If you would like to explore the collections further, please consider getting a free reader's card. Our staff are happy to answer your questions about the Newberry after the program, or you can visit our website to explore all we have to offer. The aforementioned exhibition gallery will be open after the program. Feel free to stop in before you leave, especially to see the incredible work of Vida Sačić, one of our speakers here tonight. I'm really proud that we also worked with School of the Art Institute alums and current students to create these amazing free takeaways that are in the exhibition, including this one by Dave Swak, who is in the audience tonight. So you can talk to Dave about his work and be sure to check these out. They are free and they're incredible, so I'm super proud of them. Programs like this one are free and open to the public thanks to the generosity of our community of donors. To support our work, consider making a gift to the Newberry. We will conclude this event with a Q&A, and as whether you're here or in the room or online, please text your questions to the very easy to remember number 833-899-3399 at any time during the conversation. The phone number will actually be on screen throughout. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce our speakers, both of whom are incredible artists and equally incredible people. And they both have been so generous in opening their studios to me and sharing their wealth of knowledge that they possess. They're extremely helpful and inspirational to me in thinking about printing and design in Chicago, so I'm delighted to hear what they have to say this evening. Amira Hegazy, a native of Milford, Michigan, grew up in American and Egyptian cultures. Experiences navigating between identities, places, and cultures informs much of her work and research methodology. She makes images, books, objects, and texts and teaches design history and theory at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and Columbia College, Chicago. Her research project at the Design Museum of Chicago, which is incredible, Letters Beyond Form, looks at typography in Chicago's diverse neighborhoods to investigate design legacies and their contemporary echoes. She has exhibited her work throughout the U.S. and internationally. Vida Sačić, professor in the Art and Design Department at Northeastern Illinois University, is an artist and typographer who works on long-term projects at Hamilton Wood Type and Printing Museum in Wisconsin and Tipo Renaissance in Ljubljana, Slovenia. She has exhibited in dozens of solo and group exhibitions across the United States and Europe, including at the DeVos Art Museum in Michigan and the Center for Book Arts in New York City. She's been artist in residence at the Penland School of Craft in North Carolina and the Center for Book and Paper Arts in Chicago. And with that, I will turn it over to Amira and Vida to tell us about themselves and their work and their place in Chicago design, the design community.
Thanks so much, Jill. Vida and I are going to start by just doing a little bit of our own introduction to show you some of our work and walk through a little bit of what we've been doing.
Yeah. Do I go first?
You do go first.
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Vida Sačić. I'm an artist and a printmaker that works here in Chicago. I have been working with letterpress printing and printing equipment for over 15 years now. I work with printing presses, with wood type, with metal type. I have a couple slides to show you today of my recent work. Oop, there's some sirens going on. So this is some work that I have done recently during my residency at Riverside Art Center. This is actually the work at the Flex Space Gallery at Riverside. I was an artist in residence there in March 2024, and I created a body of work that was inspired by immigrant correspondence. So there are prints here that have excerpts from letters that immigrants wrote to their families. They're all letters that came from University of Minnesota archives. So I've worked with that content and then also included some of my own personal correspondence that's layered among the archive that I printed. I worked with some of my students to create work that is also includes their personal correspondence, and that was all a part of this like site-specific installation at Riverside in March. I've been thinking a lot about connecting to my place of origin. I'm somebody that has dual residence, so I work a lot across different spaces that are connected. More recently, I've been interested in having my artistic practice relate to the place where I come from, and that led me to have a solo show at Flora Gallery in Dubrovnik, Croatia. So this is one of the slides from that event. It took place in July. I was really happy to be welcomed there. I was also in residence there. The work that I created incorporated contemporary content. So I spoke to Chicago artists who are contemporary makers, and I printed the words from our conversations and created, an exhibition that offered a dialogue between folks that were making art here in Chicago and then the audiences in Croatia. A lot of the type that I used for that particular body of work was American type that was contemporary, but then I also used Croatian wood type that I had acquired in my hometown in Croatia, some of the last surviving type from there that I brought to Chicago and used to print this work. And then I also used type that I designed. I designed a typeface called Miss Olga typeface, which was created in honor of Olga Hecker, the typographer that worked in 20th century in Croatia, but whose work is largely, undocumented now. So she was an inspiration, and I created a typeface that was then also made in wood type, and I worked with a studio in Ljubljana that created it. So all of these research went into my work that I'm currently working on. I'm also working at Hamilton Wood Type Museum. This is actually a slide from this past weekend. This was on Friday that I created this piece. I'm working at Hamilton periodically. They're a wonderful place that's welcomed me and allowed me to work with their equipment to create prints, much like the prints that are on display now here at the Newberry in the Making an Impression Immigrant Printing in Chicago exhibition. So that's a little bit about my more recent work. Amira, do you want to tell us about yours?
Sure, thank you. So it's my work is a lot of things, and I've been kind of grappling with that as I'm growing as an artist and a scholar. For the last 4 years, I've been working on this exhibition that is currently at the Design Museum of Chicago, Letters Beyond Form, Chicago Types. This work, I feel like I could only do it because I'm also a maker, because I'm a designer and a printer. In the city, I spent time learning from graffiti writers, calligraphers, sign painters, type designers, and learning what letter forms are to them. Taking walks through neighborhoods with people to understand what signs, what places were speaking to them and why. I spent time showing people images of the word market in different type and saying, which one do you think you would walk into? Why would you go there? So learning a lot about what typography means to the people of Chicago within our neighborhoods, specifically Bronzeville and Pilsen. So I encourage you to go see that if you'd like. I'll probably bring it up as well later. In my own practice as an artist, I print, I make books, I make sculpture. This is a print in my studio. You see some of the the plants that are there. My family all lives pretty far away. My mother lives in Australia with her husband, who is Australian. My father is Egyptian. He lives in Cairo with his wife, who is Palestinian. So a lot of the time when celebrations happen, we just send each other flowers. When we're sad, we send each other flowers. And the beautiful thing about flowers is that they die. And it's this way of remembering and showing up continuously. That, like, hey, I remember you now, and there's going to be a distance, and this thing is not as beautiful as it once was, but it can still be here and documented. So I make these prints of the flowers they send me, of flowers from my garden. They're prints that are layered ghost prints on top of one another. The second print of something, when you don't re-ink it, is called a ghost print. It's not something I'm just making up. So I've been working with flowers, printing, thinking about memory, fading, and distance in those ways. I also make sculpture. I think about these bricks as prints. There's a matrix. I make them in a very consistent way. These bricks are made based off of ancient Egyptian methods. So the Egyptians, I've read, are the first people to make bricks, mud bricks in this way, but many histories are lost. So it's totally okay if you know a different history than I do. So following those archaeological schematics of how they made bricks, I then use materials available to me here in Chicago to make them. These bricks, they're not in the desert. They fall apart. I grow plants in them, plants that are both native to Chicago and Egypt, in this way of trying to reconcile my placelessness or multi-placeness, perhaps. I travel often to Cairo as well. My father is an engineer, built houses growing up, and one of my favorite things about that is that I was never allowed in the job sites because I was a woman. But my brother was. My brother's now a physicist. He doesn't make bricks, and I think it's really beautifully ironic to make this in a way and be the one who's getting my hands dirty when that wasn't really what I was allowed to do. I think that's enough for now. I think we were going to start by just talking about like how we came to Chicago.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting story. How did you come to Chicago?
Oh.
You know what it is?
No, I can start, yeah. I came here for graduate school. I was living in the Shenandoah Valley in Lexington, Virginia. I ran a letterpress design business there for a while and really was trying to resist going to graduate school because I was like, art school, do I really need more art school? And I found that teaching was the most joyful thing that I was doing as part of my practice as I took on apprentices through my work, and I realized I wanted to be a teacher. So I came here for graduate school and worked in at SAIC in the
Where
print
did you
media.
come from? Where were you before?
I was in Lexington, Virginia,
Okay.
but I'm from Detroit.
Okay.
I'm from
Okay.
Detroit.
You're from Detroit. You grew up in Detroit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it kind of felt like a homecoming, to
Yeah.
be frank.
I mean, Chicago is kind of like Detroit a little bit. I don't know. I don't know anything about Detroit. I'm looking at Ben Blunt. I don't know anything about Detroit, but yeah, that sounds
Yeah.
I came here for teaching too. I came here
Okay.
for my job.
Okay.
So I got a job. I got a teaching job here, tenure track teaching job that I currently am still at. And that was like 15 years ago. I'm
Okay.
dating myself. And I know. But yeah, it turns out it was a great job. I kept it, and it brought me to Chicago, more importantly, which felt kind of like a homecoming for me too, because I had been in Indiana,
Okay.
where I had been in Indiana since I was like 18, which was when I was an exchange student and came from Croatia. So came from Croatia as an exchange student to Indiana, then ended up coming to Chicago, and that felt like homecoming because of my community here.
That makes sense. I mean, I think that's very real, I think, for both of us. Because like after I graduated into the pandemic, which was totally strange, and I had no community. Like everyone I went to school with went back home. Like nobody was in the city anymore. And I remember like I got that position at the design museum right as the pandemic was clearing up, and that's what kept me here, and I grew community.
Mm-hmm.
And I know as we've been talking, just like thinking about the role that community plays both as somebody who's not from a place, who's like moving into a place, but also in like developing prints and our work. I like what I'm thinking about, like for me, that's been a lot of very intentional placemaking and like space building, like for my friends and for my community.
Mm-hmm.
Are you doing like the same sort of thing? Is that happening in like?
I mean, I was thinking community just like in terms of like I was really thinking about pickles because really it was here that I found like stores that had my food.
I
So
love that.
it was literally like the community of people that ate things that I ate growing up that were here. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
it's kind of like, but yes, I mean beyond like having a cultural connection to folks that live here, or Chicago already being home to people of different cultures, including the one I grew up with. Chicago is also a place where you can build community, and that naturally builds community. And I think that you kind of have to be in the
yeah,
matrix here, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
and and it's a good thing because um, we all coexist together. So I think naturally communities are formed, but also spaces are created where community can be fostered in ways that I just cannot imagine it happening quite in the same way somewhere else, even in another major American city.
totally. I actually the first time I met you, I was in. It was my first year of graduate school, and I joined the Chicago Printers Guild. And I went
Yeah,
to a studio tour at your studio, and I don't know if we actually formally met, if I was
I
brave
think we
enough.
did.
Okay, I love that for us. That's
Yeah,
great.
I want to say yes.
Good, cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's, you know, the Printers Guild, which is still happening, still fantastic, does these great events that like brings people together, and even just like with no cost barrier. Like even if you're not a member of the guild, they're like, hey, come hang out. And I
yeah,
think that's like one of my favorite things about being a printer, frankly. I remember in undergrad, I decided to be a printer because it was so communal. Like I saw painters in their studios painting alone. I saw draftsmen, you know, going and drawing alone. But like people in my department were making prints that were maybe like 10 feet long. You can't do that alone. I
not
mean,
10
maybe
feet.
you can. I,
Not 10.
like,
I do 40 inches by 58,
okay,
but yeah,
okay, okay.
that's my limit. But no, you're right. You're right. I think that there is a natural like printing, right, is a part of a communal practice. I think there's a way that the medium naturally invites collaboration. I mean, I find that particularly for letterpress printing. You know, I'm primarily a letterpress printer. I do other types of print media work. I work sometimes with ceramics or sculpture, but I consider myself a printer that's firmly like lodged in the letterpress tradition. And that I think that that world is completely different than other
Oh yeah.
art worlds for me. You know, I went to public school for my master's degree. I'm an Indiana University kid, Indiana University Bloomington, and I was completely shaped by that program. And even though I completely resisted it the entire time I was there, I was really, really trying to like not do what they wanted me to do. And then I graduated and did basically exactly what they taught me, to which I owe any success to. Shout out to Indiana University Bloomington. But yeah, I mean, that's why I love my area, is because not only are printers looking to produce work for the public, and they're looking for that engagement, but the community itself is incredibly tight-knit, giving, supportive, and all about passing on the knowledge. I mean, yes, you have to know, like you have to really show a true dedication to the tools, but it is very open source as its ethos, which is funny because it is this old technology, but the way people think about it is open source, as opposed to what I imagine somebody's artistic practice in an Ivy context could be. Like I don't know that experience, but I know that my experience of this kind of, the working folks of print,
Yeah.
that's really I mean, that's just where I belong. I can't, I kind of like don't fit anywhere else. So I have no choice.
Yeah. there's like no pretentiousness in it. I mean there can
Yeah, it
be, there
doesn't
can be.
fly.
Don't get us wrong, but I think it's the thing where you're dealing with this machine that weighs, you know, a ton, and something's wrong and you don't know what to do. Like, you got to be humble and call the printer across the way. I mean, Vida and I actually, our studios are in the same building on the same floor. I don't know that there's any other letterpress printers in at Mana.
No.
And it's sort of ironic that we both ended up in the same place, like walking distance from each other.
Yeah, we're neighbors.
Yeah, we're neighbors.
We're neighbors. Yeah, and it's funny because you visited my studio when I was in Ravenswood. I was in Ravenswood
Yeah.
Corridor for a long time, and there's this huge tradition of great printmaking studios there, including Jen Farrell, who is such a, you know, a powerhouse and somebody I hugely look up to. So I was really happy to kind of like grow up in that area and be around, you know, folks on the north side. But now having a studio for the last few years on the south side in Pilsen, again, other opportunities open. And like especially,
Yeah, for
you know,
sure.
hearing you talk about your exhibition, for instance, it's fascinating for me to, you know, the way you acknowledge the community that you're working in, and the way you've brought that into your practice.
Yeah, I studied sociology in undergrad, in the sociology of art, and thinking about like why art matters and what art does. And I spent a lot of time in Cairo studying what happened post-revolution there, because much of their population is illiterate and people were coming out and making art. So I interviewed about 25 artists there. Many of those artists, none of that work was able to be published for the safety of the artists, because many of them were being jailed or killed for speaking up or doing that sort of stuff. But what I learned from them is that art is this thing that if you let people do it and tell them that they will not be judged, and show them the joy of it, they will do it. They will do it, and they will express themselves in a way that sometimes writing is scary. I mean, even song has been incredibly influential in the Middle East, in protest and in joy. I mean, song is always a thing that's really important in my culture.
Yeah, I think in every culture, I
Yeah.
do think so. I mean, absolutely. And I think, you know, those might be words that make their way into our prints. I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
know. I guess I work with language all the time, and I think of letterpress printing as like, and I know you have a printing press, so I think of you kind of also
Yeah.
as a printer. But you know, I know that working with words, I'm often like printing texts that have that connection to song or have that kind of connection to history. Um,
I think a lot of my work, I like my letterpress work has been mostly collaborative.
mm,
So I haven't published a lot of my own work in text, but I work with other artists to make books, and make their prints with them. Because I mean, for me, printing is about that sharing, that generosity. I think generosity is a necessary part of printing. When you can make multiples, like why not? Why not make one for somebody who can come into your studio? Why not share in that way? I actually started making, like my print life started by making portraits. I would make woodcut portraits of people that I then would print in addition. So like while I didn't start in text, that's kind of where I've landed
mm,
now, maybe by way of learning letterpress, because I learned letterpress not in school. I learned it through apprenticeship after I had graduated.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, and many people learn it in as an apprenticeship because it just seems like that's the way the craft is passed on. So that's a big part of, I think, how a lot of people access it. Did you find like that was interesting to you?
Yeah, it was. I just like fine press printing or fine art printing takes so long, and it's so laborious. I was actually right after graduating, I reprinted an edition of like USGS, I think it was like 1900 or 1903 maps, like copper plate. It was such a great opportunity, but after printing a small edition of those, I was like, man, this is laborious. Like I got to get to the gym, got to like make sure this is like safe. Um, and letterpress, the thing about letterpress printing is that you can just do it, and you don't have to be as like physically bodily involved. I mean, with with the Vandercook, you definitely have to be involved. But I wasn't like covered in ink at the end of the day, like everything. I wasn't worried about these like the preciousness of the copper plate of scratching it or doing something with it. It felt like I could play, like I could just do what I wanted. I could move things around. I could print some and then change it and then flip it, and it was a lot more accessible and a lot more fun and a lot more generous.
That's funny to me that okay, couple things stand out. Number one, like you're like, I don't want to do something tedious, you know. I mean, I feel like that's how I feel kind of maybe about reso printing or another printing, right?
Oh,
But when
okay.
yeah, but like obviously for reso, like it seems so much more simple than letterpress. For me, like the performative act of actually printing is 98% of what I'm doing,
That's
you know.
cool.
And I think it's probably informing the work in that way too, because
Yeah.
really technically, I mean, I really could just like do this on the computer and print it out, right? Like,
Yeah.
this occurred to me in graduate school as well when I was studying this. So why do it, you know? So why print
Yeah.
this way? And I mean, at the end of the day, I think the only like real answer that makes sense for me is to, because of the process, like then there's something about the process and the performance of the process and the physicality of the process that informs the work irrevocably, you know. And I think the work is just it's just determined by it in a way,
Yeah.
the outcome of it, but also like the process. I think informs like why even do it. So for me, that's just a huge part of it, you know, is like the tediousness of it. Um,
I find that meditative.
makes it.
I find that part really meditative. For me, printing was about mediation. I think when I first came to printing, I was very much a control freak. And maybe this is ironic for printers, especially letterpress printers, because it is tedious and things got to
Yeah.
line up, and it is a kind of a perfection based thing, like where perfection is possible, but that's a real choice you got to make if that's what you're aiming for. But for me, printing was like it's gonna go through this machine and something's gonna come out, and like I can't control every part of it. So it was like this learning about letting go of that element, and being physically involved was just linked to that bodily to letting go. Like I've always been fairly athletic, and like being mind and body sort of together in the process has always been important to me. But I think I don't want to feel like I'm wrestling with something. I want to feel like
Mm.
I'm working with it, and
Well,
like
you can't
letterpress
wrestle
printing.
with it because it's gonna win.
Oh yeah, it's gonna break
Like there's
me.
no, you know, there's no. I
Yeah,
mean, it's just like
you're
yeah, you
right.
can't
I
fight
mean, we
it.
saw those prints.
You can't fight it. You gotta go with it. But I think that's the beauty of it, you know, is that you do. It is like a dance where you are working with equipment that you can that you know responds to you in a way, and obviously everything around you responds to you, including people, you know, and
Yeah.
the world is responsive. So I think that. Um, yeah, for me, that kind of dance is really important. And I think I don't know, I came out of a style, like I came out of a school where control was very much the preferred method. And a lot of my colleagues, you know, are experts in what they do because they can
Hmm.
make exquisite prints. And I think that that's something that is truly like wonderful, you know, and rare and needs to be celebrated. And my impulse was to push against that, of course, because I really wanted to see, okay, we have these old tools and we have these, you know, this heritage of printing, but how can we challenge it? How can we work with it so that it becomes something new? Um, you know, I think that for whatever it's worth, that tension informs it, and I think that's really beautiful about this particular medium is that control and letting go
For sure.
balance, you know.
Yeah, and I feel like being educators, I learn a lot from my students from the ways that they don't know how to control things, and I think being in the educational space and watching people learn how to make something, or even when I show them something I made, and then they're disappointed that what they try to make isn't the thing that I had made, and I'm like, I've been doing this for 15 years. I would hope, you have so much more, and you're going to make your own thing, and it's not going to be the thing that I made. Like, please. And I learned from them in the ways that they're able to experiment. And it's funny hearing you talk about like your professors and now being a professor. Like, do you see that like from your students, or how does that relationship change? Like do they look up to you in that same way? Do they look at it and be like, wow, this is so perfect?
I think it's interesting teaching letterpress printing because they start out with no baseline of not really knowing what they're doing. So they're coming in from a completely different way of thinking. So I think there is a lot of technical learning that they need to do to get there. And I think that's the real struggle, is like understanding how do we make our lives work with this medium, because I also teach on the computer, and that's a really different way of making art. So the tool is really determines how you make artwork or how you make your work. There's always that tension. I think they always do try to like have a certain outcome, try to control a certain outcome. But I'm more interested in also kind of like the way folks learn in communities. So like getting them together in a group and learning like how can we as a team, as kind of a little hub of people together create something. I mean, that's always interesting to me in classes too.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, I mean, it's a very like it's an interesting experience to be on the other end. And now I look to my professors and I kind of experience them differently than I did when I was in school. But I think everybody has that. It's been a really long time, so my relationship with folks that used to be my mentors is now more as peers.
Yeah.
And that's always an interesting gap as well, as like going over, now having the honor of being somebody's peer, and like continuing to build that relationship.
Yeah, for
It's
sure,
really
for sure.
interesting.
I experienced the same thing, and it's very funny. I remember having a bad class one day and calling my mentor, and she's like, Amira, it was just bad. And that's how class goes sometimes. And I'm like, girl, what? You never had bad class? And she's like, yeah, I did. You just like didn't see it that way. I was like, okay, you're right. You're right. It's okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really a great sort of thing to grow into.
But it really depends on who's in the class. It depends on the folks that you're working with, as always. And I think I teach at Northeastern Illinois University, which is a public school, and it's wonderful small campus. A lot of our students are from diverse backgrounds, diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, a lot of Latinx students. We have a really great community of folks that are learning to become designers or artists, and that are like working on building something from very little. And I think being around that kind of group of people and having that dynamic in the classroom and seeing them work with each other is such an honor for me as an artist to be a part of that, because not only am I passing on like the knowledge of this craft and I'm able to be there to support them, I'm actively really, really inspired by them as people, even more than as, artists. I mean, and as artists as well. But when you hear people's stories, it's incredible the amount of vigor that they bring.
Oh yeah.
So, I think that is always great in the classroom. What you're receiving
Totally.
becomes just as valuable as what you're putting out. And to see some of the results too of where people go with their work is really mind-boggling and impressive. And to see students that used to be your students are now your peers and are doing just as exciting work, or work that is inspiring me, as an artist in the world. I mean, it's really, really, it kind of puts you in your place and makes you think about things.
Totally.
But yeah, it's again about that community and symbiosis, that comes out of print and comes out of working in the Chicago art community.
And I see like we have a lot of international students at UIC as well, especially in our graduate program. And I'm working right now with my students to make books, and I think the concept of like the book as an object that holds authority in its materiality, like just by being a print, by existing, by being a book, it is somehow an authority, even if it's self-published. And seeing my students, we have a lot of students from Iran and a lot of women from Iran in our program who are really excited about women's rights, about feminism, about the craft and the women who are tied to that craft, which makes me think of your Olga Olga typeface in that project, and seeing them feeling empowered by accessing print for the first time and being able to share their work in this medium and put it up. And even, I mean, sometimes they distribute zines and prints and small artworks throughout campus, and just seeing them learn and see their voice in that way through this medium has been really exciting to me and reminding me like what print maybe has always been, and what it was in the beginning, it just as a really revolutionary tool, and perhaps maybe now a little bit more revolutionary sometimes than the digital tools that we have, because there's a way that you can say something that, you know, Mark Zuckerberg doesn't own.
He owns a picture of it, though.
I mean, if somebody takes a picture of it, yeah, that's real. But one of our students was making work about the free speech policy at UIC, and making some interesting work that was actually, it was printed out and it was photos of the facade of the building, and then they lined it up perfectly with the building. So you almost couldn't see it, like it camouflaged itself. And then if you pulled it off, it had the free speech policy, and it was this ironic moment where she was like, well, this is, you know, not allowed. I can't put a flyer up that's unsanctioned, even though it's literally an image of the building, and it camouflaged itself into the building. And seeing them like play with these, you know, political moments, and seeing how print can speak in a way that perhaps some of these digital mediums and other things just don't give them the same voice, has been incredibly inspiring to me.
Yeah, I had a really wonderful student this past semester, who's like 9 months pregnant in the letterpress class, which was completely freaking me out because you know her, because it was like if she had to clean, and you were like thinking about all the solvents, but we use baby oil, so everything's okay. And she was just like super pregnant, letterpress printing her statement, and she came from Afghanistan, right? She came through the Afghan refuge program, and I met her like a year ago. She couldn't speak English really well as well. You know, this woman has made so much progress, and now pregnant with a daughter. We know it's a girl. You know, I have all these pictures of her printing and making these beautiful layouts that were, you know, profoundly like confessional about her experience. And it was really in that process, like just seeing her inky with like ink on her face, and like I have pictures of this, that you really see how the practice of making it, the process was a liberatory process for her. You know what I mean? And through that, I think there was an example. She created an example for me, and I think other people there as well, of the power, you know, that she had within her, and claiming that through the arts. I feel like it's just amazing. So to be a witness and be a part of those stories, you know, to be an artist that makes work and is able to then just pass on that energy to the next person and have them continue creating, to pass it then on. I think for me that's why I do it, you know, and
Yeah.
that's why I'm so honored to like be able to have my practice and have my teaching practice supported, you know, like I really
It's the
feel
whole
like,
thing.
yeah, I feel incredibly fortunate, you know, with it. But, and I know it's a big part of your practice too, that is
Yeah.
just like community through
Yeah.
teaching, but then also through peer relationships.
Totally. I do a lot of work with organizations. I've done a lot of work for protests. A lot of my work doesn't have my name on it. It's stuff that I'm making quickly, or teaching other people to make quickly in place, in practice, to amplify their voices.
Why don't you put your name on it?
Because it's not mine. It's
But you
everyone's.
made it.
Well, but they made it too. I think,
Uh-huh.
like, for me, it's I don't need to own it. I don't need to own it. That voice is not just my voice. It's the voice of the people who ask me to do it, the people who are scared to do it, the people who support me in doing it, my friend who makes me dinner. It's all of us, and I don't need to own it for it to
But
be mine, like it's yours, like it's someone else's, and it doesn't make it any less from myself.
But do you think like putting your name on it means that you own it, or is it just like your name is on it?
I don't know. I think it feels it doesn't need to be there. And I think for protest type stuff, I don't think I need that attention. I think by not claiming it, I get to put whatever attention is drawn to it onto the organization or onto the words that are being said. That I know I made it, and if I'm applying for a job or something, I can share it in that capacity. But I don't think putting my name on it is going to add anything generative for the cause or for the people who it serves. I think being able to like put whatever attention my name may take from it onto the issue feels much more, I don't know, nice.
I think it's noble. I do think it's noble to think of things that way, but I think there's also a value to knowing that you produced it because it documents you in the great canon of people that have made stuff. And I think that's really, I think it's really important because
Yeah.
I often see like, you know, women or people that maybe aren't as used to taking up space, naturally taking that position. And I really like can relate to that line of thinking. But then I'm also going, okay, well, I know that for me, I'm such a fan of knowing people's names, especially
Mm.
printers. And I think the Newbery is really wonderful this way. And the work that Jill Gage has done here and the in creation of the exhibitions, knowing who the printers are, I think is just really special
Yeah.
and powerful. And I think even knowing that all these little people's hands were needed to create something. This is where I break into like a socialist song, but no, I mean a lot of folks' efforts were needed to create something, and I think to have that documented is really powerful and interesting. And
I
the
hear
work I
that.
did with Olga Hecker's typeface for sure was inspired by wanting like Olga's name to be in the archive, which it now is since Newbery acquired the work, and that
Yeah,
meant a lot to me because it was like we came in together. What
totally.
an honor for me to be able to come in with her.
I guess maybe I to think about that and also move it forward. Like a lot of that work, because of my connection to libraries, I used to be a rare book conservator. Um, I often will collect those things, those protest things, and donate them to public institutions. So like maybe there my name is on it because then I fill out the information and it's part of it as well because that feels incredibly important is giving those materials as printed materials to institutions that will hold them and save them well. Not that all collections are safe collections, but finding a collection where something fits well and will be cared for feels really important and meaningful
Yeah,
to pulling those stories through history.
absolutely, especially like in the Newbery where the archives are so powerful, and I think there's just a lot of creativity
Yeah.
in archives as well.
So, with that, ending with the Newbery and archives, we do have quite a few questions. Thank you so much. That was so fascinating. First of all,
Thank you.
thank you. We have we have a number of questions. A few of them. So I will also say that I think this is one of Vida's process photos from Hamilton, is it not? And we have other photos because there are a number of questions about the actual process of printing and the physicality. I love, and she definitely is like pretty covered in ink in the
Yeah.
photos. But a couple people were asking it just if you could quickly walk through the actual process of like making those prints, that the big prints that you showed
Yep.
at the beginning.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this print is a sister print to the 3-4 prints that are in the exhibition. They are all printed using large wood type. So the letters are actually blocks of wood type that is preserved in Hamilton Wood Type and Printing Museum collection. They're ginormous letters that I hand inked. They have a large printing press that I'm able to use with them. So I printed these all by myself. Jim Moran helped me cut the paper, and because that's hard if it's on a roll. But the process was basically picking out the letter forms, stacking them, and I hand inked them. And that was the time-consuming part, is like mixing the ink creating the shapes and hand inking the forms. And at that point, they're just locked in. And then I have now developed a system where I can actually pull this sheet of paper through myself. For me, that's important because it is about the way my body relates to the form as well as the final piece. So the performance is something that, I think informs what I'm doing. They're all in editions. They're small editions, 3 to 4 prints that are near identical. I ink up using the same pattern. I follow the pattern on the form before I pull another print. So yeah, I've just made 3 this weekend. It was really fun.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So a couple people also asked about your immigrant background or connection to your culture and how that comes out in your teaching. So I know, like, Amira, when you were working with your students about typefaces and things, does your background inform that or inform the way that you think about that work? Or
I think especially so I started my teaching journey by rewriting curriculum at Columbia College Chicago for their design history class. And when I was working on that class, I was working with a more traditional art historian, and what I could bring to that was a lot of non-Western history. A lot of things that I had learned by just investigating my own culture or knowing other people from different cultures. And we actually changed the curriculum to include a lot more, perhaps from the Middle East, from Asia, talking about histories that are not as robust in English language, perhaps, but at least touching on them and being able to invite our students to find more, rather than steering away from stuff that we don't know quite as well. Because I've found when talking to other design historians, they often say, like, oh no, I can't teach that because I don't know a lot about it. And it's like, it's okay, you don't know a lot about it. You can tell them you don't know a lot about it, but you can't deny that something existed because you don't know it. So I think that's the largest place where my background, I think, comes in, and also having seen, since I've become an adult and was an adolescent, just how many libraries have been bombed. The idea that a people without culture are a people without place, are a people that can be taken over, and thinking that, like, we can continuously just reinforce that culture existed even if we don't have those artifacts, despite these awful and violent acts against it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really relate to what you're saying because
Yeah.
we have a lot of the same histories in the area of former Yugoslavia where I'm from, and I have a good colleague that's working on some of the preservation of those materials. So I think bringing those, that's an incredible job in of itself, to bringing those into archives.
Yeah. And I mean, in teaching typography, especially to students who maybe only know Latin alphabets, just bringing in specimens of Arabic type, and just showing them how many letter forms and the ways in which they have to change, and calligraphic strokes, and then they become very grateful for their Latin roots, and just showing them, the immense history of letter forms and art, and the ways that those have shaped meaning in very different ways than Latin languages have.
and then for Vida Special, well, for both of you, I guess, there have been some questions about, is it different working in English or in your in other languages, and does that inform how you work, or do you find yourself working differently?
Like as an artist, like making work. Yes and no. It's cop-out answer, but for these I'm not so much because it's a single word that I'm working with. So I feel like sometimes, I do a mix. Increasingly for me, it's very similar because I am thinking through the languages as one. Like essentially for me, they're kind of filtered through my prism, and I'm no longer changing them and thinking of them as separate. I work in Latin type exclusively, even though in the area of former Yugoslavia, parts of former Yugoslavia use Cyrillic writing, not my area though. So I don't really work with Cyrillics, even though I can read them. So I'm a Latin-based typographer artist. So for me, it's very similar. What I'm more interested in is the context of the language, this hidden layers that words bring in with them, and especially the preservation of local dialects. Like that's something where I really, that I really enjoy in my native language, which is Croatian.
I think I learned Arabic and English alphabets simultaneously as a young person, but I wasn't taught how to speak Arabic. I was just taught how to read Arabic. In the Muslim tradition, it's sacred to be able to read the Quran. So I was taught how to phonetically read it and with the accent and with the recitation, which did this very strange thing in my brain where I started to write English right to left as well. And I think somehow this primed me to be a letterpress printer because I can read backward and forward just as easily. And I sometimes have a really hard time, like I have to type stuff on my phone to remember if I wrote it the right way or if it's laid out the right way, which I think is a cool design skill that I perhaps have is just seeing letter forms not necessarily having to go one direction or another and thinking about reading as like as something that can change and flip. So I found that shapes a lot about how I design and think about text. I know. I know. Yeah.
And then for our final question, I think we had a couple people ask variations on this. You both kind of talked about mentors and design programs. You're both educators. A couple people talked about apprenticeships. And do you have apprentices? Are there apprenticeship programs, or do you just kind of see your departmental programs or university programs as being like the apprenticeship, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mostly see my university programs as my um, areas where I have apprentices. It's very difficult to have an apprentice. I don't know if people know this, but like it's so much work to have an intern or an apprentice because you have to find work for them and it has to be the right person, and it's actually really challenging to find the right person to work with you. So I've historically been shying away from it simply because I cannot put the time in to train somebody. So for me, working within the institution is the perfect model for what I'm doing. Could I see that grow in the future? Maybe, I'd love to have a studio where like my studio is my business, and I have a studio manager and an intern, but maybe that would also change it in ways that I wouldn't like. I don't know.
Yeah, I've had apprentices. I think especially when I was in Virginia because I ran a business there, so there was always work, and also I was gifted presses by somebody who had actually stolen these presses from the local newspaper. When they put them out to scrap, he and his friends went and grabbed the presses and moved them. So it felt really important to pass that history on to other people. Those presses, once I left Virginia, I left them there with those people, so they didn't leave their place of origin since they were gifted. So it was important to me, knowing that I was moving, to teach other folks how to do this, because the person who I got this presses from was quite old and was not printing anymore, and he was so excited when he found out that I printed. So I took on a lot of, not a lot, but I had like 2 apprentices at that time who still print and do that. And they were actually quite a bit older than me and were practicing artists. And that was really the place where I learned that I really wanted to teach was spending time with them and mentoring them. I still do, and I think maybe because I'm adjunct, I'm part-time and have had, this curatorial practice next to my teaching practice. I also do sometimes commercial work as well. I often take on apprentices, but it's hard to maintain that relationship, especially with young people. I've found because they're moving on in their careers, and I mean honestly, just at the place that they're at and thinking about like what is equitable labor, how do I as they're learning, as they're growing, pay them well or give them an experience that is commensurate to what they're doing for me. How do I pay it back? And I think those cultures are and ways of working are not as often talked about, and negotiating that is hard, and making sure that that's like contractual and understood, and that care and that love and understanding is within that work. Because in my own apprenticeship, I just worked with folks in Virginia because I was excited about it and would go to them if I needed help and would help them with their projects, and it was very informal. and I would just learn from other people in that way. So I would love to take on an apprentice, but again, I think it has a lot to do with the consistency of my own work. At UIC right now, actually, my colleague and I are printing this book, and we're taking on some graduate students kind of as apprentices just for this semester. We're teaching them how to letterpress print since we don't generally have a letterpress class. Many of our students don't get that intensive training in letterpress printing. They work with our tech, Danielle Mellis, who's a very accomplished letterpress printer and bookmaker, to help learn to make their own work. So that is a nice place where we can do it, but it is quite difficult to care about someone in that way and consistently show up for one another, I think, from both sides.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for this evening. I have a lot of other questions that I will ask you afterwards. Please do come see the exhibition and talk to Vida and Amira. And thank you all so much for coming tonight. Really, let's give them another.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Nice.